You know, if it's not about sports, I find it very hard to concentrate.
So I'm starting a new series on my channel and it will be called Rivals. Similar to my Dead Stadium series, it will have multiple parts and it'll be an ongoing series. I'll be going over all the great rivalries in various sports, and if you have any suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. This will include player rivalries as well, Manning versus Brady, Bird versus Magic, etc. Today, however, I will be going over the storied football rivalry between Ohio State and Michigan, known as The Game. I'm only going to be focusing on the football version of this rivalry in this episode. Maybe I'll do the other sports that Ohio State and Michigan play each other in, but let's be honest, the football rivalry is really where it's most intense. This rivalry actually predates college football as a whole, if you can believe that, or at least the roots of the rivalry do. Let's rewind to the early 1800s. At the time, poor understanding of the geographical positions of the Great Lakes led to a boundary dispute between the state of Ohio and what was then the territory of Michigan. This led to the governments in both Ohio and Michigan to claim ownership and jurisdiction over a 468 square mile region along their shared border called the Toledo Strip. This feud came to a boiling point when Michigan applied to be a state in 1835 and included that 468 mile region as part of their state in their application. Both sides passed legislation attempting to force the other side to cave in and give up that region. Ohio's Governor Robert Lucas and Michigan's Governor Stevens T. Mason, who by the way was only 24 years old at the time and running an entire U.S. territory, passed laws that would criminally penalize any residents that submitted to the other side's authority. Both Ohio and Michigan ordered militias to assemble on both sides of the Maumee River, which was near Toledo, Ohio. But fortunately, no fatalities occurred. They just kind of yelled at each other from across the river. Very anticlimactic. There were shots fired into the air, but no one was struck by bullets. And the only person that even got hurt was a law enforcement officer who was stabbed, but the dude survived the stabbing. But United States Congress knew they had to come in and play referee or else things could potentially get much worse. So they proposed that Michigan would give up its claim to the 468-mile Toledo Strip, and they would be granted statehood. They would also be given 3/4 of the remaining unclaimed portion of the Upper Peninsula. Although Michigan at first rejected the deal, pressure from the U.S. President at the time, Andrew Jackson, as well as a looming financial crisis that Michigan was dealing with, caused Michigan to finally accept. This later became known as the Toledo War, sometimes called the Michigan and Ohio War. Michigan and Ohio State would meet on the gridiron for the first time in 1897, and a lot of folks that were around for that first initial meeting between the two schools were alive roughly 60 years prior for the events of the Toledo War. It's possible that the tension never really went away, and that it was used as fodder to stoke the flames of what would soon become an intense rivalry. The first ever meeting was held in Ann Arbor, Michigan, home of the Wolverines, and was a 34-0 victory for Michigan. The two teams did not play again until the year 1900, also in Ann Arbor, which was a 0-0 tie. Michigan would start off the rivalry strong, winning or tying every meeting until 1912, and held a 12-0-2 record in the rivalry heading into 1913. The 1902 contest in particular was brutal, with Ohio State losing 86-0. Ohio State joined the Big Ten Conference in 1912, and in 1917 Michigan rejoined the Big Ten after a 10-year leave of absence. Ohio State got its first ever victory against Michigan on October 25, 1919, which was a 13-3 Buckeyes victory in Ann Arbor. The next season, Ohio State got its first ever home victory against Michigan when the Buckeyes defeated the Wolverines 14-7 in Columbus. Ohio State opened their brand new stadium, Ohio Stadium, in 1922, and they continue to play there to this day. Due to its horseshoe shape, it is sometimes informally called the Horseshoe. College football was growing in popularity by this point, and so was the rivalry. The dedication game at Ohio Stadium was a 19-0 shutout loss to Michigan in front of 72,000 fans. And when the Wolverines opened their brand new stadium, Michigan Stadium, also informally known as the Big House, in 1927, Ohio State was the opponent for the dedication game too. It was a victory, with Michigan prevailing 21-0. At the end of the 1920s, Michigan held an all-time series lead over Ohio State at 19-5-2. Michigan claimed national titles in 1932 and 1933 to start the decade, and Big Blue was becoming one of the first non-Ivy League teams to develop into a national power. But Ohio State's luck was about to change when Francis Smith was hired as head coach to lead the Buckeyes starting in 1934. Leading up to that 1934 season, Michigan had beaten Ohio State in 9 of their previous 12 meetings, but Schmidt was about to change that as Ohio State rattled off 4 straight victories over their rivals up north from 1934 until 1937. Even more impressively, Michigan didn't even score a single point against Ohio State during that period of time. Schmidt became known for not only turning around Ohio State's fortunes in the rivalry, but also for a quote of his. Upon being hired in 1934, he was asked if he thought his team could beat Michigan, and he said, quote, "Of course we can win. Michigan puts their pants on one leg at a time just like we do," unquote. Since then, whenever Ohio State beats Michigan, each player receives a gold pants pendant, oftentimes with the score emblazoned on it. Michigan would close out the decade winning 3 in a row versus OSU from 1938 until 1940. The 1940 edition of the game was the final collegiate game for Michigan's star tailback duo of Tom Harmon and Paul Cromer. The following year, in 1941, the two teams met for the first time when they were both ranked in the AP Top 25, which had only begun publishing college football rankings 5 years prior. The Buckeyes were ranked number 14, and the Wolverines were ranked number 5, and they duked it out to a 20-20 tie. In 1945, Michigan quarterback Howard Urgis, who had previously played for Ohio State, led Michigan to a 7-3 victory over the Buckeyes. He is one of only 3 players to play for both teams in this rivalry. Michigan would win 5 out of the next 7 after that, and closing out the 1940s, the all-time record was 30-12-4 in favor of Michigan. The 1950 version of the game was noteworthy because it took place during one of the worst blizzards in Ohio history. This game was important for Michigan because a win would give them the Big Ten title outright, and a trip to sunny Pasadena to play in the Rose Bowl. Ohio State was also in the mix for the Big Ten title, although a win would not guarantee them the title. For that, they would also need Wisconsin to lose. Conditions for this game, which later became known as the Snow Bowl, were absolutely terrible. The temperature was a frigid 10 degrees Fahrenheit, with the wind whipping around at 28 miles an hour, while heavy snow continued to fall, as much as 2 inches per hour. Snowbanks were lined up along the field, and it was difficult to make out the markings on the field from the accumulation of snow. It was so cold that some fans built bonfires in the stands, and some fans even put cardboard boxes on their heads with eye holes cut out to shield them from the snow and freezing wind. Michigan won the game 9-3, even though they didn't gain 1 first down. They also didn't complete any passes and punted 24 times. But the Buckeyes didn't fare much better in the nasty weather either. They had just 34 yards of total offense and punted 21 times, and 4 of those punts were blocked. Ohio State's punter was actually their halfback, Vic Jankowitz, who won the Heisman Trophy that season. He was responsible for OSU's only points in that game, kicking a field goal in the first quarter. Ohio State's head coach Wes Fessler was criticized heavily for his play calling in the Snow Bowl, as he often punted on first down to try and pin Michigan deep in their own territory and try and force a fumble on defense. This led to Fessler's resignation, and this chain of events led to one of the best things to happen to Ohio State's football program, the hiring of Woody Hayes. Between 1951 and 1968, under Woody Hayes, the Buckeyes beat Michigan 12 out of 18 times. The 1958 game saw victory snatched out of Michigan's hands, literally. Ohio State held a 20-14 lead near the end of the game when Michigan fullback Gene Sissenak ran for what would have been the game-winning touchdown, except Ohio State's defensive tackle Dick Schifrath hit him, which caused Sissenak to fumble, sealing a Buckeyes victory. And I'm so sorry if I butchered those names. Go ahead and type your comments now about how I pronounced it wrong. If I had a penny for every time I got a comment saying I pronounced something wrong, I would have more money than my AdSense probably. But anyway, back to the story. The 1968 version of the game was particularly enjoyable for Bucs fans, as they saw their team trounce the hated Wolverines by a score of 50-14, outscoring them 29-0 in the second half. Woody Hayes actually went for a 2-point conversion on Ohio State's final touchdown, despite being up by so much, and the game being well in hand. Despite the 2-point conversion not being successful, Hayes was still asked in the post-game press conference why he went for 2, and he replied simply, "Because they wouldn't let me go for 3. That victory gave Ohio State their first Big Ten title since 1961, and the Buckeyes were named AP National Champions for the 1968 season. Michigan's head coach Bump Elliott resigned after the 1968 beatdown against their hated rivals, and in his place, Michigan hired Bo Schembechler, who had previously worked on the coaching staff of Ohio State under Woody Hayes. This would begin what became known as the 10-Year War, referring to the 10 seasons that Hayes and his former assistant coach Bo Schembechler met as head coaches in this fierce rivalry. The first matchup in the 10-Year War took place on November 22, 1969, when the top-ranked Buckeyes rolled into Ann Arbor to face a Michigan team that was considered a major underdog. Ohio State was expected to win easily, however, that's not what happened. The Buckeyes saw their 22-game win streak broken in a 24-12 upset. All great sports stories have their share of colorful characters, and Hayes and Schembechler were certainly two of them. Woody Hayes, an Ohio native, started out coaching Miami of Ohio and led the team to a Salad Bowl appearance in 1951 against Arizona State. That moderate success led to him being hired as head coach of Ohio State in the fall of 1951. He coached the Buckeyes from 1951 until 1978, when he was fired because of an incident in the 1978 Gator Bowl versus Clemson. Clemson linebacker Charlie Bauman picked off a pass thrown by OSU quarterback Art Schlichter, and when he was run out of bounds, he stood up and faced the OSU sideline, at which point Coach Hayes punched Bauman in the throat, causing a bench-clearing brawl. Woody Hayes wound up being fired as a result of this, but it's not as if this was a new behavior for Hayes. He had thrown a punch at an LA-based reporter in 1959, said that he believes Vietnamese men should die. His words, YouTube, not mine. And in a game in 1971, threw a referee's flag into the stands. I guess red flags just look like team spirit when you're the coach of the Buckeyes. Get it? Because their colors are red? Okay, I'll stop. Bo Schembechler, on the other hand, was a lot less hot-headed. A native of Michigan, he was also the head coach of Miami of Ohio from 1963 until 1968, leading them to a 40-17-3 record in his time there and winning 2 Mid-American Conference titles. Prior to that, he held positions on the coaching staffs of Presbyterian, Bowling Green, Northwestern, and of course, Ohio State under Woody Hayes. He was hired to take over Michigan's football program in 1969, where he quickly became the best coach in the history of the program, winning 194 games, which is a school record, and had a .796 winning percentage and never had a losing season as head coach of the Wolverines. Michigan won or shared 13 Big Ten titles and made 10 Rose Bowl appearances with Schembechler at the helm. So these two men were poised to add more history to what was already considered by many to be the most heated and intense rivalry in college football. 4 times between 1970 and 1975, the two teams met when they were both ranked inside the top 5. The 1970 matchup between the two was all about revenge for the Buckeyes. To motivate OSU players, a large rug was placed near the entrance of their practice field, which read, quote, 1969, Michigan 24, Ohio State 12. 1970, Michigan ? Ohio State ? Unquote. The Buckeyes were ranked 5th and the Wolverines were ranked 4th, and OSU prevailed at the Horseshoe in front of their home fans by a score of 20-9. Woody Hayes later proclaimed that it was the best defensive game his team had ever had. By the time the 10-Year War ended, Schembechler had the advantage against Hayes 5-4-1, with the one tie coming in 1973 in Ann Arbor. The rivalry was heated before, but the 10-Year War no doubt took that hatred to another level. Hayes once refused to stop for gas in Michigan, saying he'd rather push his car back to Ohio than spend a single nickel in the state of Michigan. And honestly, that's what I like to see out of rivalries. Pure, unfiltered hate. As a BYU fan, I probably hate Utah equally as much as Hayes hated Michigan. Hayes also had the distinction of coaching the first and to date only player to win 2 Heisman trophies, running back Archie Griffin, who won back-to-back Heisman trophies in 1974 and 1975. Hayes said of Griffin, quote, "He's a better young man than he is a football player, and he's the best football player I've ever seen," unquote. After Hayes was fired, Earl Bruce was hired to lead the Buckeyes. Bruce had previously been the head coach of Iowa State, where he led the Cyclones to 2 bowl appearances. He is, as of this video's release, the only head coach in Iowa State history to leave the school with a winning record. The Bruce and Schembechler era of the rivalry was probably the most balanced one, as neither Ohio State nor Michigan won more than 2 years in a row. Bruce wound up being fired in 1987 after the Buckeyes finished with an underwhelming 6-4-1 record after starting the season in the top 5 and tying 4th-ranked LSU early in the season. Ohio State also got blown out by an unranked Indiana team that season when they were ranked number 9, and came into the Michigan game on a 3-game losing streak. But with Bruce's fate already being decided by school administration, and knowing that it was his last game as head coach of Ohio State, his team upset the heavily favored Wolverines by a score of 23-20. After the game, Schembechler said, quote, "I always mind losing to Ohio State, but I didn't mind so much today," unquote. After Bruce's dismissal, the all-time series stood at 46 to 33 to 5 in favor of Michigan. Former Arizona State head coach John Cooper took over the Buckeyes football program starting in 1988. He was fresh off of a Rose Bowl appearance where his Sun Devils squad beat, oh, would you look at that, Bo Schembechler in Michigan. John Cooper was overall very successful at OSU, despite having a losing season to start his tenure there. The Buckeyes would win or share the Big Ten title in 1993, 1996, and 1998. In his 13 seasons at Ohio State, he went 111 and 43 and 4 there. But there was just one thing he had a lot of trouble doing: winning against a rival. Dating back to his days at Arizona State, he had trouble in rivalry games. He never once defeated ASU's rival Arizona, and against Michigan, he had a 2-10-1 record. The 1993 edition of the game was a particularly painful one for Buckeye Nation. Ohio State came into the game ranked number 5 in the country with a chance to clinch a spot in the Rose Bowl. But the Wolverines upset the heavily favored Buckeyes, costing them a trip to Pasadena. In 1995 and 1996, the Buckeyes were ranked number 2 in the country entering the game, and Michigan upset them both times. The 1995 loss also cost them a chance to play in the Rose Bowl as well. In 1996, the loss cost them something much bigger, a national championship. But in 1997, Cooper would lead the Buckeyes to the Rose Bowl against his former team, Arizona State, and won, becoming the first coach to win a Rose Bowl as a head coach of a Pac-10 team and as head coach of a Big Ten team. Meanwhile, for Michigan, despite their dominance of Ohio State in the 90s, their football program was going through some changes as well. Bo Schembechler turned the program over to assistant coach Gary Moeller in 1990, and he was successful as well. He compiled a record of 44, 13, and 3 in his 5 seasons, including an undefeated record in 1992 with a 9-0-3 record. However, Moeller would resign in 1995 after he was arrested following an incident at a restaurant in Southfield, Michigan, where he got drunk and caused a scene. Lloyd Carr, a former Schembechler assistant coach, took over as head coach of the Wolverines starting with the 1995 season. This would kick off one of the most successful eras in Michigan football, with the Wolverines winning the national championship in 1997 and finishing 12-0. It was the first national championship for Michigan since 1948. Michigan cornerback Charles Woodson would win the Heisman that season as well, becoming the first player on the defensive side of the ball to win. Ohio State rebounded with a win against Michigan in 1998, but in 1999, Michigan quarterback Tom Brady led a game-winning drive to defeat Ohio State 24-17. Michigan would win again in 2000, which was John Cooper's last season coaching the Buckeyes. Ohio native Jim Tressel took over the program in 2001, and his hiring would bring on one of Ohio State's most successful eras too. Today, Tressel serves as Attorney General for the state of Ohio, but in the fall of 2001, he was a 48-year-old ball coach who had never coached at the FBS level before, but had major success at the FCS level, leading the Youngstown State Penguins to 4 national titles during his 15 seasons at the helm. Unlike John Cooper, Tressel put a special emphasis on making sure he beat Michigan. In Tressel's first season at Ohio State, he led them to their first road victory against Michigan in 14 years, and the next season, in 2002, Tressel accomplished a feat that John Cooper was unable to, and that was beating Michigan 2 years in a row. That was part of Ohio State's national championship winning season. During that 2002 championship winning season, the Bucks were led by freshman running back Maurice Clarett, who I think I'll do a video on in the future due to how his career ended up. In the game against Michigan in Columbus, Clarett rushed for 119 yards and a touchdown. In 2003, Michigan rebounded and won the 100th meeting between the two schools by a score of 35-21 at the Big House. That game was attended by 112,000 people, which was a record for a college football game at the time. In 2004, the Buckeyes came into the game with a record of 6-4, while the Wolverines were 9-1 and ranked number 7. The Buckeyes, led by future Heisman winner Troy Smith and receiver Ted Ginn Jr., upset the Wolverines 37-21. Ohio State won again in 2005 by a score of 25-21, with Smith passing for over 300 yards and Ginn recording 9 receptions for 89 yards. The 2006 edition of the game, held in Columbus, would be given the nickname the Game of the Century, due to each team entering the matchup undefeated, with identical 11-0 records. For the first time ever in the history of the rivalry, the two teams played each other while ranked number 1 and 2 respectively, with Ohio State being number 1 and Michigan being number 2. The night before the game, Bo Schembechler sadly passed away, and despite the game being played at the Horseshoe, Schembechler was honored before the game with a video tribute and a moment of silence. The winner would claim the Big Ten championship and a spot in the national championship. Ohio State won a close one, 42-39, but went on to lose to Florida in the national championship by a score of 41-14. Ohio State won again in 2007 by a score of 14-3, which turned out to be Lloyd Carr's last game in the rivalry, as he would retire following the conclusion of the season. Tressel put together an impressive 6-1 record against Carr, leaving Carr with a losing overall record against Ohio State at 6-7. To replace Carr, Michigan hired West Virginia head coach Rich Rodriguez, who, fun fact, is actually again West Virginia's head coach as of this video's release in 2025. Rodriguez took over the program starting in 2008, and Michigan struggled right away. The Wolverines held a 3-8 record entering their final game against Ohio State and got absolutely smacked in Columbus, losing by a score of 42-7. Ohio State won again in 2009 by a score of 21-10, and Ohio State won its 7th game in a row in the rivalry the following year in 2010, although this isn't technically counted because Ohio State was forced to vacate all their wins from that 2010 season. Michigan fired Rodriguez following the 2010 season, and in his place they hired Brady Hoke, who had previously served as defensive line coach at Michigan under Lloyd Carr from 1995 until 2002. Meanwhile, Ohio State's football program was dealing with their own turmoil as they were in the midst of an NCAA investigation regarding incidents in which several players had traded memorabilia in exchange for tattoos, which was against the NCAA's rules at the time. Evidence emerged that Tressel was fully aware of the violations and chose not to report it. On May 30th, 2011, Tressel resigned and Luke Fickell was named interim coach. Ohio State was forced to vacate all wins from the 2010 season, which is when the incidents mostly took place. Tressel went 8-1 in the rivalry with a win streak of 7, but technically 6 because the 2010 win against Michigan was removed from his coaching record. In 2010, the Big Ten added Nebraska, who had previously played in the Big 12. The Big Ten split into 2 divisions, putting Michigan in the Legends Division and Ohio State in the Leaders Division. Concerns arose that the Big Ten would eliminate the end-of-year rivalry between the two due to the possibility that the two could face each other in the Big Ten Championship. Fans of both teams sent in letters and emails to the Big Ten commissioner, and eventually it was made a protected crossover game. In 2023, similar concerns arose when Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA joined the Big Ten, but those fears were quickly quashed when the conference introduced a Flex Protect model, with the game being one of the 11 protected rivalry games. The Big Ten eliminated divisions in 2023 as well, meaning that it is still possible for Michigan and Ohio State to face each other in back-to-back games. Michigan won against Ohio State in 2011 by a score of 40-34, their first win in the rivalry since 2003. It was also the first time since 1929 that the rivalry featured 2 first-year head coaches. On November 28, 2011, Urban Meyer, who had defeated Jim Tressel in the national championship when he was coaching at Florida, was named head coach of the Buckeyes. This would usher in a new era of Ohio State football, and also their most successful era in the rivalry to date. And for the next 8 matchups between the two, OSU would dominate, winning all 8, which was their longest win streak against Michigan. Ohio State also won the first ever college football playoff in 2015, defeating Oregon 42-20 on January 12, 2015. The 2016 game ended in controversy when, in double overtime, Ohio State quarterback JT Barrett kept the ball on 4th and 1 and was tackled at almost exactly the line to gain, and the refs gave him a favorable spot, which extended the drive and allowed Ohio State to eventually win. I remember watching, and as a neutral party who doesn't really have a dog in this fight, it looked to me like he was short of the line to gain. That's just my opinion though. In 2018, Urban Meyer retired from coaching, citing health issues. Offensive coordinator Ryan Day took over the program and is still Ohio State's head coach as of this video's release. Meyer briefly coached the Jacksonville Jaguars in 2021, but was fired for many reasons that I won't go into in this video. Meanwhile, the once proud and strong Michigan football program fell on hard times. They went 5-7 in 2014 and fired Brady Hoke, replacing him with former Stanford and San Francisco 49ers head coach Jim Harbaugh, who had once played quarterback for the Wolverines. Harbaugh started off strong, going 10-3 in both 2015 and 2016, and seemed poised to turn the program around. The next few seasons were rough, however, hovering around 500, and Michigan fans were growing irritated at the fact that Harbaugh seemingly couldn't beat Ohio State. I remember message board forums and Twitter posts at this time, and Michigan fans were saying they wanted Harbaugh to be fired. The Buckeyes entered the 2020 season with an 8-game win streak over Michigan, and looked likely to make it 9, But the college football world and broader world in general was disrupted with a global pandemic, and the 2020 contest was cancelled, marking the first time since 1917 that the two teams did not play each other. However, in 2021, Michigan finally snapped OSU's 8-game winning streak against them, winning 42-27 against the Buckeyes in Ann Arbor. The 2022 edition of the game was another one where both teams played each other while ranked in the top 5, with Ohio State ranked number 2 and Michigan ranked number 3. However, the Wolverines would win 45-23, with Michigan quarterback J.J. McCarthy passing for 263 yards and running back Donovan Edwards rushing for 218 yards and 2 touchdowns. In 2023, Michigan and Ohio State met, with both holding undefeated records for the second year in a row. Michigan was ranked number 3 and Ohio State was ranked number 2 yet again. Michigan would prevail again by a score of 30-24 for their third straight victory over the Buckeyes. And Harbaugh didn't even coach in that game due to NCAA violations related to alleged sign stealing and allowing impermissible benefits by a member of Michigan's coaching staff. Michigan assistant coach Sharon Moore filled in. Michigan ended up winning the national championship that season, defeating Washington by a score of 34-13 to finish with a perfect 15-0 record and their first national championship since 1997 when Lloyd Carr led them to one. But following the 2023 season, Jim Harbaugh left, taking a job to be the head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers of the NFL, a position he still holds to this day. Sharon Moore was named the next head coach at Michigan, and heading into the 2024 matchup with Ohio State, the team was struggling at 6-5. Meanwhile, Ohio State, led by transfer quarterback Will Howard, was ranked number 2 and held a 10-1 record, with their only loss being to Oregon. Michigan was a 20.5-point underdog, but pulled the massive upset to win their 4th game in a row in the rivalry. The game was sloppy from both teams, with both Howard and Michigan quarterback Davis Warren throwing 2 interceptions each. Following the game, a brawl broke out between the two teams when Michigan attempted to plant their flag at midfield of Ohio State's home turf. It got so bad that police had to pepper spray players on both teams. Ohio State went on to win the national championship for the 24-25 season in the first year that the playoffs were expanded to 12 teams, just like they won it in the first year that the playoffs were added. And that's where the rivalry currently is. Michigan has not lost to Ohio State since 2019 and is currently on a 4-game win streak against the Buckeyes. This rivalry isn't just part of college football history, it is college football, period. Arguably the most heated rivalry in all of college football, with the two's mutual hatred of each other predating football as a whole, from Woody Hayes refusing to spend money in the state of Michigan, to the famous 1950 Snow Bowl, to the multiple high-profile matchups with conference and national championships on the line. This rivalry has seen a lot. The series has seen 119 matchups total, with Michigan having the all-time lead against OSU, 62-51-6. The largest margin of victory was Michigan in 1902 with an 86-0 victory, and the longest win streak in the rivalry is also Michigan, winning 9 straight matchups from 1901 to 1909. The two teams have met 14 total times, while both were ranked in the top 5, with Ohio State leading in these matchups 7-6-1. Ohio State has dominated the 21st century, leading 16-7 since 2000, not counting the 2010 win, which was vacated. Michigan has 12 national titles, while Ohio State has 9. Michigan has 45 total Big Ten titles, while Ohio State has 39. Michigan has 3 Heisman Trophy winners, while Ohio State has 7 Heismans in their trophy case. As of the end of the 2024 season, the two schools are number 1 and number 2 on the list of all-time wins by a football program, with Michigan being number 1 and Ohio State being number 2. However, Ohio State has a higher winning percentage all-time. Both teams have had their share of triumphs and heartbreaking defeats in the series, with both great players and great coaches contributing to the history of the rivalry known simply as the game. Big shout out to the YouTube channel College Football Historian. He has footage of literally every single OSU and Michigan game since the year 1930. It was a super helpful resource to use. If you liked this video, be sure to leave a like. If you hated it, leave a dislike. But either way, comment for the algorithm. Peace out.
Can never ever find the right words, and there's no way this is real life. There's no telling you're the right girl, so I can only say that it feels right. It feels right, it feels right. Yeah, I can only say that it feels right. It feels right, it feels right. Yeah, I can only say that it feels right.